Hey, it's Austin James. If you're like me, trying to live your best life while living with diabetes, you can relate to worrying if you're doing a good job managing your diabetes. I use the Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor to get real-time glucose readings and see the impact of every meal and activity to make better decisions. The Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor can help me live life with diabetes on my own terms, and it gives me more time for the things I love, like being a dad and a musician. Now this is progress. Learn more at freestylelibre.us.
For prescription only. Safety info found at freestylelibre.us.
I'm James McComb, reporting live from home in my bathrobe and slippers. Tonight, we're talking Dunkin' Polar Peppermint Coffee. Gene's here with the latest. Gene, do you copy?
The home with Dunkin' is where you want to be.
Hello and welcome to Heroes and Humans of Football. My name is Mehreen Khan.
And I'm Simon Cooper. This is the football show where we take the hero and we show you the human.
From Johan Cruyff to Megan Rapinoe.
And from George Best to Kylian Mbappe.
This is the Human Football Podcast.
Hello and welcome to a live episode of Heroes and Humans. This episode went out to our Patreon subscribers first and was open to the rest of you a week later, which should be all the incentive that you need to join our Patreon club or to give somebody Heroes and Humans Patreon membership as a special gift. And if you go to the Heroes and Humans website, you can do that now. We recorded this episode at the brilliant Kilkenomics Festival in Kilkenny, Ireland, where both Mehreen and I have been regulars for years. And our guest on stage in this episode is the great Irish novelist Roddy Doyle. And our guest on stage in this episode is the great Irish novelist Roddy Doyle, whose best-known books include The Commitments, also a movie, Paddy Clark Ha Ha Ha, The Woman Who Walked Into Doors, and as we discussed with Roddy, The Van, which is set during the World Cup 1990. Importantly, Roddy also ghostwrote Roy Keane's memoir, The Second Half. And like Mehreen, bizarrely and perhaps unjustifiably for an Irishman, he's a Chelsea fan. So we talked to Roddy about Chelsea, about Roy Keane, of course, but also about how Roddy is completely unjaded with modern football. He still loves it. About his feelings about Irish lads Declan Rice and Jack Grealish playing for England. He gives footballers tips about how not to be a celebrity. And he talks about what football means to all of us fans. Thanks a million to Roddy for agreeing to do this. Enjoy, everybody. Heroes and Humans is the show where we...
My name's Mehreen, co-host.
You were supposed to say, we take the hero and we show you the human. It's a football podcast, and so far, each episode, we do it about a person. So, for example...
This week, Paul Pogba. You can understand whether he's just a lazy sod or actually a brilliant genius who's had the world conspire against him. Roddy, we changed your mind about Paul Pogba, so you should definitely listen to that.
Listen to the podcast, change his mind. That's a model for the audience. A Swedish backer asked me to do a football podcast. I realized that it would be boring for people just to listen to me go on and on and on. My wife has told me so. So I needed a co-host. And I chose Mehreen because she disagrees with me about everything.
Yep, absolutely everything.
And it was a bad choice. I regret it now, but here we are. The third person we have with us this evening is, I think, best known as the man who ghostwrote Roy Keane's second memoir.
I'm still alive.
He's still alive. Also the most heralded Irish novelist of his generation and a poet, and we'll come to this, of sort of working class Ireland and great at capturing the aspirations of working class people. And of course, that ties in very nicely to football. Lastly, why are we in Ireland for our first ever live podcast event? Mehreen, maybe you can...
Well, the podcast has been going for about 5 or 6 months now. And for most of that time, Ireland is our biggest market. So you guys love us. And that's because Irish people have a much higher tolerance and acceptance for, I think, high quality football content, much more than British people.
Higher IQ, it's also...
Much higher intelligence. You get all of our jokes. So we're incredibly grateful. So it was only fitting that we did our first show to, I think, our probably most loyal and, for now, still one of our biggest audiences.
Yeah. Thankfully, Ireland is no longer our biggest audience worldwide because that would be a real mark of failure. You have now been surpassed.
So, Roddy, let's start at the beginning because we're going to do football.
Yeah.
And you're a man of impeccable taste because you're the first Irish person I've ever met who's a Chelsea fan. I'm a Chelsea fan. It's not always the most popular choice. So tell me, how did it happen? And am I right in thinking that Chelsea isn't a team beloved by the Irish?
Well, yeah, Chelsea is not a team beloved by
At
the
all,
Irish.
full stop, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And it kind of always has been. If memory serves me right, I was watching the 1967 FA Cup final with my father. I was 9. And Chelsea were playing Spurs. I didn't really know the consequences of this. I didn't know who Chelsea were. I didn't know Chelsea was in London. But I decided I was up for Chelsea. They lost, which became for decades quite a common experience. But by the end of the game, anyway, I was a Chelsea fan. I was thinking about it today because I suppose I was anticipating the question, but I didn't even know their jerseys were blue because I was watching the telly, it was black and white. So my education came later. I became a football fanatic very, very quickly, you know. I also remember watching the 1966 World Cup final with my father and really enjoying it. I think being with my father, watching it was a big, big thing. And then another was the FA Cup final in 1970, the replay, the famous replay, Chelsea versus Leeds. And I was just 12. And Chelsea won that replay. And I don't think I've ever been happier. I was going to say, you know, the only thing better was the birth of my children, but I have to be honest. They came a poor second, third and fourth. Chelsea winning the FA Cup final, perfect age, you know, 12 for it to happen. And then, you know, again, watching it with the family at home. And then World Cup 1970, being allowed to stay up late, again, with my father, Pele. Oh, an amazing experience, you know, just the privilege of being able to stay up late. I was still in primary school, going into school the day after. And, you know, other lads chatting what we'd seen. Perfect age for such great moments, I think. But Chelsea, yeah, it was just... There was another lad up the road who followed Chelsea, but everybody else was Man United, Liverpool and Leeds. There was one guy, he was so eccentric and brave. I haven't heard of him in 50 years or so. And believe it or not, in Dublin, he supported Glasgow Rangers.
Wow. No, he's braver than you then.
Yeah, and it wasn't because of his roots or anything like that. I think he just liked a good fight.
So, as you, I guess, maybe disabuse yourself of some of your ignorance about Chelsea and you discover the kind of unique place that maybe Chelsea have in English football, even also politically, you mentioned Rangers, who are a sort of twin or sister club actually with Chelsea. Did you ever think twice and thought maybe this is not going to fit into my broader political beliefs?
Really,
we also talk about Bohemians. And
I think once you choose your team, that's your team. I've nothing but contempt for people who change their minds and decide to follow half the Arsenal fans in the world, you know.
Shots fired.
You know, even the reaction, I'm bang on. So, no, once it's your team, it's your team. And, you know, they did. The fans had a reputation and it wasn't great. But, you know, I suppose because I wasn't living in London, I wasn't going. I think I was 20 before I actually went to Stamford Bridge.
Yeah.
But that didn't really, I don't want to be dismissive of, you know, important things, but the reputation for racism and it was second and third hand, really. And, you know, it's a bit like, we could all argue that, you know, the world of football is a mess, it's so commercialised or whatever, but when it comes to the crunch and you're watching 11 men or 11 women playing 11 men or women, and you know that a lot of them would play for nothing, just the love of the game and the love of physical, that's when it's at its best, you know. So I wasn't supporting the fans. I was supporting Peter Osgood, Charlie Cook, Peter Benetti, players that I can still rattle off their names. John Dempsey died, I think, yesterday or the day before. And, you know, it saddened me, because even though, you know, we are all mortal and our time will come, you know, it feels so grateful to that man for his work at Chelsea. Can't criticise him for his political views or his ideology. Do you know, I've no idea what
I'm with you. I'm completely the same. I spoke a little bit about why I'm a Chelsea fan in the podcast. Super unpopular choice growing up as a British Asian in the, even then, 80s and 90s, terrible reputation, most right-wing club in England. And I was like, but I've just seen Zola play and I'm going to stick with my decision. And it makes me really unpopular, the playground. I mean, it was a great decision in the end. I mean, it's turned out pretty well. And we are a club that offers constant stream of drama. So
it's never boring.
It's never, ever boring. And actually, you know, maybe we'll talk about this a bit later, but I think maybe one of the reasons that I enjoy doing the podcast is a brilliant escapism into a different world when so much other things in the world are just quite emotionally taxing. So in that sense, I will always be grateful for Chelsea and football. There you go.
Yeah, well, so say all of us. Maybe not Chelsea, but football, certainly.
Football.
But what did it do to you, and what does it do to so many Irish people to be dreaming about footballers and a club on the other side of the sea?
Well, there was always the Irish side to it. You know, virtually all the clubs had good Irish players, great Irish players. You know, you had Steve Highway at Liverpool, for example. You had Paddy Mulligan at Chelsea, array of great players at Man United. So a lot of people actually I know began supporting, say, Leeds United because Johnny Giles played for Leeds United. So there was always that. And even though, you know, I've met lots of British people who've never been in Ireland, which always puzzles me a bit because it's only across the water. It's not the same. A lot of Irish people go to Britain, and our knowledge of Britain is probably way better than the average British person's knowledge of and interest in Ireland. So, you know, Liverpool has always felt very close geographically and culturally. So it didn't seem all that. I know it probably seems quite bizarre from the point of view of somebody from outside Ireland, but it all felt perfectly natural when I was a kid following an English team. Do you know, to be honest, I ended up doing geography. When I left school, I did geography in my degree and ended up teaching it with English. And one of the reasons I became interested in geography was because of the league tables. Do you know, where's Crewe?
Yeah. Well,
I was in Scotland on holidays. We were driving around Scotland, and every time we come to a road sign, and I'd be saying to my partner, "Oh, there's a team there." How far? You know, it was, and it adds to my like. I'm really fond of Britain, and I think it's largely because so many football teams.
Yeah.
I forgive Britain quite a lot.
It's very strange that this country did such terrible, well, the UK did pretty poor things here, I've read, and yet there's this kind of love for this central part of British culture. I find it hard to completely rhyme as an answer.
I think it reflects the complexity of Irish life as well, because soccer was written off along with other sports, as a garrison sport in the early days of the state. And the GAA had this ban where you weren't allowed to play both, or even go to. You couldn't play Gaelic games and garrison sports like rugby or, more importantly, football. So football was like an urban game. The towns of Sligo Town, Limerick, Cork, Wexford, Dublin, Drogheda, Dundalk, places where I think there were garrisons in all those towns. And, you know, any city, any town is a magnet for people from elsewhere. And I think there was an attempt when the state was founded, and it's only just over 100 years ago, you know, it's very same age as my father, really, if he was alive. I think it probably some people, when the state was founded, and this attempt to make it Gaelic speaking and just, if you like, very insular, a lot of people wouldn't have felt altogether at home with that, because urban life is so much more complicated. And I think the affection for football, leaving aside, you've got to remind ourselves as well that to my mind, there's no doubt whatsoever, it is the best sport. It's the most engaging, it's the most dramatic, it's the one that has the least interruptions. It's the one that allows a variety of body shapes and sizes in a way that other sports don't. So it is the best, and it's a team sport. And it's the best sport for shouting and roaring. And that's vital. And the referee did such a vital part of it as well. Hatred of the referee is such a fundamental part of the contempt rather than hatred, I think. But so for all those reasons, you know, following football in Ireland, in a way, in a bizarre way, where supporting Gaelic games before independence was almost like an act of sedition. Supporting football after independence was an act of defiance and sedition as well. And it only became really a universally popular sport after Italia 90.
Wow.
Yes, and I was going to come to that because I was just today rereading The Van, which is your novel set in Italia 90, with fantastic period details. So when Ireland beat Romania, you have the Irish fans in the pub chanting, "Ceausescu was a wanker."
Well, I think history has proven me correct.
Indeed. And for those who can't remember every detail of summer 1990 fan culture, can you tell the audience what a Dunphy was?
Sausage and batter. Yeah, Dunphy, Eamon Dunphy, brilliant pundit. I mean,
Yes.
the level of punditry on RTE at the time was so much better than on the other channels. And there was a great freedom to it because after the game, the lads were just let talk. John Giles, Eamon Dunphy. Brilliant then, guy Bill O'Herlihy reining them in or provoking them. And they could go on all night. Do you know, they decided not to run the ads and they could go on all night and they were amazing. And Dunphy, like, it's extraordinary. I mean, he's incapable of not being controversial. I mean, he's brilliant at it. And so he was a kind of a hate figure at the time, or a love figure. Because
Well, he was quite critical of the team.
he
when they were
was,
winning.
and
Yeah.
in retrospect, in ways, after the Egypt game, quite rightly critical of them. The thing is, though, I watched it. I was riding the van at the time, and I was going to the games and watching them in pubs, and coming home hopelessly drunk. And waking up the following morning, it was during the school holidays, and kind of making a cup of coffee and writing, in a way, a fictionalized version of what had occurred in the pub the night before. So a lot of us ended up knowing that Dunphy had said something, but not having heard him because nobody, the sound, you couldn't hear anything in the pub. And so I never really knew what Dunphy had said. And I kind of kept it, that like sometimes it's a good idea if you're a novelist and you're writing from the point of view of the people in the pub. There's no point in knowing anymore because that's the point of view. That's what it was. So Dunphy anyway was a very controversial figure at that time and very provocative and remained that way for decades. It was, the world would be a poorer place without him, wouldn't it?
But he earned that epithet so that Dunphy became, let's say, a sausage.
Basically a sausage, yeah.
Is it still the case that is your level of punditry still a cut above the average Michael Richards level of banalities that we have in England? Sorry.
No, not really. I mean, I don't want to criticise individuals. No, it's a bit blander than it used to be. You don't know who it's going to be. It used to be, it was always Giles and Dunphy and Liam Brady.
Yeah.
And a few others in and out. Didier Mann, played for
He's an
Liverpool
Irish pundit now.
He is.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And he's great. Quite eccentric. He has an amazing eyebrow. It's a roving eyebrow because it expresses more than words could ever. And so it's almost like he's just about to cock a pistol and going to shoot someone. But so it's still quite good. But I I like Michael Richards.
I was being a bit cruel, but he does sort of, he's kind of everywhere, and I think there is this kind of homogenous sort of level of.
It's the punditry.
And there's so much of it now.
There was a game on. Yeah, there were two co-commentators at one match I was listening to, and they were so busy talking that they were ignoring the bloody football. It was Jamie Carragher and
Gary Neville.
Gary Neville. Yeah. One or other, maybe, but both at the same time. And added on to that, they had the referee, the ex-referee. What's his name? He's despicable. Mike Reid. Is it Mike Reid?
Riley, yeah.
Riley.
He sort of deciphers the VAR and think, I think the VAR.
As if the VAR needs deciphering. Yeah. Do you know? And the three of them were talking away, and there was something happening on the pitch, and it was all being ignored because they were, loving each other basically. So there's way too much of it. But the quality is still it's quite good on RTE. Yeah.
Just about 1990, it was very memorable, partly because it was the diaspora team.
Yeah.
Does that still exist in Irish football today, that connection?
Oh, it does, yeah. Yeah, it's even more complicated in some ways. Like we've Chidozie Ogbene, who's a Cork man, born in Nigeria, I think. And I think that reflects the hyphenated world that we live in. And what a player. He's a great player. He's brilliant. The energy of the man and the honesty of him, He's one of those players you just know in your gut. He'd play for nothing. He just loves and luckily enough, he's playing for us. So in a way, it's even more complicated than it was back then. But there are plenty of players. To be honest with you, I don't pay all that much attention to the national team at the moment because I don't know if the national team is paying all that much attention to itself at the moment. So the glory days are hopefully temporarily gone, but they're gone. So it's hard to get worked up about the national team. But it's still that it does reflect the diaspora, but it's not just Irish people moving out. It's other people moving in. Yeah.
And maybe now the Irish diaspora plays for England more. You hit us with this amazing stat when we were chatting upstairs that you said there's more Irish grandparents in the UK than in Ireland.
Yeah.
which is mind-boggling.
Well, they've all gone over
That
for the
because Declan
weekend.
Rice and Jack Grealish's grandparents live in England now. So,
Yeah.
I mean, did you watch the game? And obviously, that game became a moment in and of itself because of those two figures and that complicated relationship. And where do you stand on both Grealish and Declan Rice? Well, I'm hearing some like there's already a bit of tension, but
I don't know.
any sense of pride?
I could be generous.
No.
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 I mean, they didn't break the law. They definitely broke some sort of important moral
Yeah.
code. I do like now seeing them younger versions of themselves in the Irish
In the little kit,
jersey,
yeah.
It's easier to forgive Declan Rice, I think, somehow. Grealish, maybe he's just a scapegoat. But I'd love to kick him. I don't really mean that. But he's such a... I kind of... Declan Rice's career has got, he's good. Grealish, you seem to be...
Well, he's not going to get an England squad probably
No,
soon.
he's not
so,
taken. It hasn't taken off, and he's like a ludicrously expensive sub. And I kind of grand. I like that.
But I guess, I mean, it's a more normal reality now that national teams are competing in this marketplace for players' loyalties.
Yes.
And
Yeah, you
what
got-
can Ireland offer?
Yeah,
a
you've got
future-
ostensibly German guys who are actually British if they want to be. So that's the reality. Is it? It's the hyphenated world.
Yeah, and the Moroccan team at the last World Cup, most of them have
They should have been playing for Holland. I was aghast, yeah. I mean, if Hakim Ziyech had chosen to play for Holland, then we wouldn't have had this whole Morocco story, and Holland would have been in its usual
But
finishing third.
I guess countries like Morocco have developed a strategy where they know that these kids exist and they get them really early on. They speak to their parents when they're 14, 15, and they make sure that they secure their loyalties. I guess Ireland has fallen behind in this kind of international
in a way,
marketplace.
when it started, it was quite haphazard because Jack Charlton asked John Aldridge, who was playing for Oxford, would he be interested in playing for Ireland? John Aldridge said, yeah, I would. Have you asked Ray Houghton? And he didn't, Charlton didn't know that Ray Houghton, I think Ray Houghton's parents were Irish. And that's how Ray Houghton became an Ireland player. And again, we were lucky with both of those players. And they both, they're undoubtedly, were as Irish as they are, well, Scottish and English. That's the way it is. I think some organisations are better at harnessing it or harvesting even. It's a slightly brutal verb, I suppose. But people in the audience, you just have to say the three letters, FAI. The Football Association of Ireland. I don't know, ...
Yeah.
It's not the best.
I did this event at Trinity, this is 30 years ago, with Mark Lawrenson. And of course, it was natural that he was there, an Ireland international. And we were chatting beforehand, it struck me, he wasn't on TV speaking yet. He has a full Lancashire accent, so bit of a... And I said, where are your roots in Ireland? Where do you go when you're in Ireland? And he said, to be honest, I never really went to Ireland until they started picking me for the national team. And I guess this is a very common experience, but people still feel a bond.
Well, you don't hear his voice anymore, but he used to refer to, when he was, doing punditry at internationals on the BBC or whatever, he referred to we, and he was talking about Ireland. The bet with Terry Mancini, who used to play for Arsenal in the later years of his career, played for Ireland. And he was lining up for the national anthem and apparently whispered to the guys standing beside him, theirs goes on a bit, I mean, in the national anthem. And the guy whispered back, that's ours, Terry.
Yes. Which brings us on to Roy Keane.
Hey.
What did writing that book with him teach you, not just about him, but sort of about the footballer's life, something that you'd seen, I guess, from the outside for decades, and then suddenly you're inside a footballer's mind?
The single-mindedness of it, really, the concentration, I don't know, whether putting on blinkers is the accurate way, but the ability to just look straight ahead and not allow other things to distract you. And the dedication, the absolute dedication that Roy, to him, it was a job, and it was a job he had to do as well as he possibly could. And he had the brilliance, but also the integrity and the strength of character to do it. I remember asking Roy about his disciplinary record and about whether his sports psychology played any role in it. And he said, the sports psychologist in Man United, when he spoke to him, said to Roy, it's your job to stay on the pitch. which is a very practical thing to say.
Yeah.
And probably the exact right thing to say to Roy, because it's so doable, isn't it? You know, and he really took that on board, not because it wasn't a kind of a moral decision, but it was a professional decision. Yeah, it's my job to stay. I'm the captain. It's my job to stay on the pitch. That's what I would come away with, leaving aside all the other considerations. Writing that book, the very happy experience. I think we both really enjoyed it. He put everything into it. He got what I was trying to do, put his voice on the page. And he really, we proofread the book together, you know. And when we read chapters, he'd have other ideas. He'd say, I said this word a bit too often. I think I should put this one in instead. And so he came back with ideas, and he'd read something that had happened at Sunderland when he was a manager, and he'd say, oh yeah, and I forgot about this. So we built up the thing as we went along, and it was just a marvellous experience. And I think it was a marvellous experience because I was in his company, and he brought the dedication that he showed on the pitch into the project, you know. I think we both came away from it feeling very satisfied.
Did he reach out to you? How did the process of happen?
I got an email from a publisher I didn't know, a man called Alan Sampson. And I think it was about 2.5 lines. Would you be interested in writing a book with Roy Keane? And I had been in London for about 3 months because I had scripted a musical version of The Commitments, a stage version of The Commitments. And I'd been away for months, and it had just started. And I just finished a novel. So I was kind of wondering, what will I do? So the timing was perfect. So I got this email, and I gave it deep consideration for about, I'd say 10 seconds. And I just wrote back, yeah, I would be interested. Yeah. And I think about a month later, Roy was over in Dublin, and we met, and I think convinced each other that this was worth having a go for. But no, Roy didn't reach out. I do think maybe he had a conversation with the publisher about people he'd be interested in working with. So that's why my name came up. But I don't generally ask, you know, if I'm asked to do something, I don't generally say, why me?
Had he read your books?
He had read some of them, and he, you know, the films were huge favourites of his as well, yeah.
Is he of a type of a piece with the working class Irish characters who you describe, say, in the Barry Sound trilogy?
Yeah, very much. He reminded me, I'm older than him. So I started teaching when I was 21. And I would have been teaching sometimes people who were 17. So they were only 4 years younger than me. Now, that's a very significant 4 years when you're 21 and they're 17, but becomes less significant as you get older, you know. So I used to teach people who are now grandparents. But Roy reminded me of the type of kids I used to teach growing up, and I'm still friendly with. And I think if I remember right, Roy went to a community school, like a comprehensive school, very similar to the one that I taught in. So he reminded me of those kids, very similar in sense of humour, great respect for where he came from. When he talks about his team in his youth was Rockmount, and he would talk about Rockmount with the same seriousness as he would have given to Manchester United. And I know that my team, I'm from a place called Kilbarrack in Dublin, and I'm the honorary president, which means I don't have to do anything, of Kilbarrack United. I was one of the first kids in that team, and it was founded in 1970. And Rockmount were playing Kilbarrack in Cork. And I texted Roy and said, I see my team Kilbarrack are playing Rockmount. And unfortunately, I couldn't go. I was abroad. But Roy was in Cork, and he went. He was there, and I think possibly as a regular visitor to Rockmount. But he went right across to the Kilbarrack United people and, welcomed them and had a chat with them. And that doesn't surprise me in the least, you know.
You talked at the beginning about the perfectionism that struck you about being a top-class footballer, that you have to be absolutely at your best in every match, which is also a theme of Keane's. He sometimes felt his teammates weren't. And of course, in most of our jobs, mine and probably many of yours, you don't have to be,
No.
The job is showing up 5 days a week and not pissing off your colleagues too much. And footballers really have to have a completely different attitude to their work. Is there an overlap with novelists, or how did you recognize anything in that or not?
Not really. I mean, dedication to my job, yeah, but it's measured differently. You know, if I'm writing a first draft of a novel, I throw everything on the page, and I work at editing it and making it tighter and better later on. Now, you can't do that in football. And even at a training session, because training sessions are so short. That really surprised me, for example, that training sessions are so short and intense. No, there's no equivalent, but I think the end result, possibly. I did a book with a boxer, Kelly Harrington. People will know her. She's a double Olympian gold medalist. And so similar to Roy. It's the same sense of humour, same background, you know, working class, same dedication. And watching her in the Olympics this year was quite extraordinary, because at that stage I knew her a bit, and how she literally puts on the blinkers. She was in Paris, but she may as well have been in a field in North Dublin. She didn't care that she was in Paris. Her job was to win the next fight and to make sure her weight was perfect, so that at the weigh-in, she was just the right weight. And that's an aspect that you don't get in football, but I think it's the same dedication that she just turned on, ignored, say, the more celebrity athletes who were in the village, had no interest in them, no interest in anything except winning. So admirable, you know. And I think footballers, I suppose all of them, but particularly the really great ones, have that. I mean, it must be exhausting having to concentrate for the 90 minutes of a football game.
Yeah, I interviewed Kasparov once, and he said that you can't be a great chess player at footy the way you can at 20, because at 20 you can completely lose yourself in the chess game, and I guess in the football match as well.
Yeah.
And he says at footy you have a family, you have issues, you have things that prey on your mind all the time.
Yeah.
And you can't muster that 100% concentration.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Why did Roy not make it as a manager? And did he ever think that he could actually turn his hand to this?
Well, to me, like, listening to him, as I did, because, you know, we'd have these conversations and then I'd transcribe what he had said. I think that it's almost like the official record is that it wasn't a success. But actually, if you read the chapters when he was at Sunderland, it was hugely successful. They were at the bottom of the championship when he took the job, and they won the championship. And it wasn't an accident. You know, he was learning as he was going along. But when he was talking about it, we kind of more or less started with that, because my sense was that he was beginning to enjoy talking about it. And he'd start laughing on occasion because he was really enjoying the memory of it all. So it was a success. And I think he'd concede that Ipswich didn't go as well. And that, you know, I think he'd see mistakes that he had made and probably the wrong decision. But then it stopped. And I don't know, I'm not qualified to say whether he got offers or anything, because I'm not privy, you know, like we did the book together in a way that's it. Like, so, but it is a bit of a mystery as to why he didn't have another go. I think he probably would have liked another go. I can't answer on his behalf, obviously. And I see no reason why he couldn't have been successful at it, because Sunderland was really... he did really do a good job. The first 2 years in particular were, I mean, he won the championship, and then, you know, the first thing I was going to say elected, but a newly promoted team has to do is survive. And they did that, you know. Then there was a change of ownership. And really, that's not anything to do with Roy. So the Irish consortium sold to an entirely different figure. And I think, in a way, that was the end of that. So it's a bit of a mystery. I suppose it's like a lot of things. I'm not talking on Roy's behalf, and I'd never claimed to be, but life is full of regret, isn't it? What if we could have done something a bit differently? And I know my own life is full of that, but, you know, I tend to concentrate on what I actually did do. I mean, he's a brilliant pundit.
How do the Irish feel about him now? Does he still polarise people?
I'm not qualified to talk. I would say, I am qualified to say this because, you know, 11 years after the book came out, people still ask, more than anything else, about my work, what's Roy Keane like? Mm-hmm. And the world, not just Ireland, but the rest of the world is divided in two, but particularly Ireland, because I say, you couldn't meet a nicer fella. And there are those that say, oh, I knew it. That's brilliant. Yeah, I just knew. He's a nice guy, is he? Yeah, great fella. And the others say, you know, when I say, you couldn't meet a nicer fella, the answer is, yeah, but you would say that, wouldn't you? So, yeah, I think the world is still divided. Wouldn't the world be a far poorer place if we didn't have him? I mean, I think he's just as somebody to work with. Just a fantastic person. Yeah, brilliant.
One particular polarising episode I remember around him, viewing this from outside Ireland, is when during the World Cup, just before the World Cup 2002, he's unhappy with the training facilities. He kicks up a fuss and then he walks out of the World Cup. And it was explained to me, and I read stuff at the time, that this was about this kind of went to the heart of Irish issues well beyond football, that this polarized society, and it was about your national institutions not delivering in a way that the public expected. So the FAI had been incompetent in selecting the sites and so on.
Well, that episode isn't actually in our book, so to speak, myself and Roy's book. That's in the previous one. I didn't have that conversation with them about that. But if I remember, it was kind of about that Irish attitude, it'll be grand. Mm-hmm. You know, it'll be grand. And I mean, we go beyond that an awful lot. We do much better than that. But sometimes we do just getting there is enough. You see it sometimes in sport. Qualifying to go somewhere is enough. That's the achievement. And I think Roy probably would his argument be no. And actually, when you look at that World Cup, in many ways, you know, it was there for the taking. And even without Roy, we did quite well.
Yes.
What would we have done if he had been there? So I think it was that attitude. And I mean, from what the descriptions I've read, the facilities in Saipan were, you know, non-existent really. And there was a lot of socializing with journalists and things like that. And personally, I wouldn't have wanted that myself either if I'd...
No, don't socialize with journalists.
No, I don't mean just that. But sponsors and journalists. Yeah. And I think I'd be a bit like Roy and Kelly. I'd just have the blinkers on and I wouldn't want anything to do with it myself. So I think, that's what was going on. I think it is generally that attitude had to be grand, which is one of the reasons why we're Irish and why actually grand is such a brilliant word in this country. But again, now and again, it's just not the right attitude to have. And I think possibly at that stage in the World Cup preparations, it'll be grand wasn't.
How do you relate to footballers today, now that they, in this new world, they earn £10 million?
I wouldn't begrudge them a penny.
Yeah.
I really wouldn't. You know, I wouldn't begrudge any working class person the money that they could earn. And, you know, if they have the skill, they have the ability, they have the nous to get a good agent and they're earning a lot of money, good, because a lot of other people make the money that they should be earning, you know. And it's always been the case with working class musicians and footballers, other sports people, exploited all the time by people who are some other level or cleverer, maybe not cleverer, but cannier or have the connections. I think the really good footballers, when you see them playing, like N'Golo Conte, for example, the Chelsea player is now in, I can't remember where he's playing, making a fortune, but you just know from the demeanour of that man that he'd play for nothing. And he's actually, you know, but he's making a fortune, and I think good luck to him. I wouldn't begrudge him a penny, not a penny or a cent. I wouldn't begrudge them any. I think it's quite right that they are earning.
We have a fantastic episode on N'Golo Kante, which tells you the story of how he started off as a street sweeper and lost his father very young to go off and be, I think, that sung and unsung hero of that World Cup. And he is my favourite player of all time.
Yes.
And something else we talk about actually a lot with the reality of modern footballers is that they're not just making money for themselves. And for people like Kante, they are supporting huge extended families, huge familial networks, because they're the only person so many people have that could help them get a school fee, access a doctor, build a well, start an NGO. And so I think this is the part of modern footballers now. So many footballers come from the global south, or whatever you want to call them, that this money part isn't just about enriching themselves. It does much more than we could ever imagine.
And I remember seeing a documentary about Didier Drogba, you know, another Chelsea legend. And Drogba left his family when he was 6 because it would appear he had the talent, and he was sent to France to live with an uncle who was a professional footballer. And I was watching that, and I found it really heartbreaking, because the sacrifice of that to become a footballer. He's not just out there representing himself or his immediate family, it's the village, you know.
I mean, Amad Diallo scored a couple of goals yesterday, has Amad on his shirt because Diallo is the name of the person that trafficked him into Europe. So he was somebody that was trafficked at a very young age, had a very traumatic young life. And so often, you know, even the naming choices, so Virgil van Dijk doesn't have Van Dijk because he doesn't have a relationship with his father. Ahmad is called Ahmad because that's not his real name, his family name. So there's a lot of kind of, I think footballers' hinterlands now are much more complicated because of the money that's in the game as well.
But even if you're like the ones that get kind of sneered at because of the way they spend their money, or the bling or whatever, the cars, if they were middle-class actors, nobody would be criticising them. So there is a snobbery attached to it all as well, I think. But again, as I said right back at the beginning, I wouldn't begrudge them a cent. I think if the money is there to be made, they are the people who should be getting it.
Well, yes, and it's a job that is entirely about quality, and where your quality is tested every
And the
week.
career is so short.
Yeah.
I mean, I found it really, that was probably the most interesting thing about working with Roy, because we were writing about life after football. The decline of his as a footballer, as a player, not the decline because he was always great, but the decline with age, like it was happening at a time when most people are still just growing up, in your 30s, your early 30s. So it's an extraordinary thing to have to face redundancy when you've got probably 2/3 of your life still to live.
I was struck though, I mean, the Commitments is about these working class people who form a band, and it's great, it's thrilling, it takes you along, and then it collapses at the end and they, I think, go back to their lives. And the footballer's story is as if they form the band and it becomes massive and they leave, and then you can sort of never go back home again. So how do you see that trajectory for people who come from those kinds of neighborhoods and then they are separated from them in a way by...
It's funny, I'd never given it a thought.
Okay, fair enough.
I think to a degree that's a choice, that's a personal choice. I'm not comparing myself to a footballer in any sense, but say, for example, when The Commitments, the movie, was released in 1991, there was a premiere in Dublin on a Wednesday night, huge thing, brilliant evening, never forget it. I went to work the day after.
As a teacher?
Yeah. In 1993, when I won the Booker Prize, I still used public transport and continue to do so, because it's a choice. If you want to make yourself a celebrity, I think there's not a lot you can do about fame sometimes, but there's a lot you can do about celebrity. And I think some people make the choice to make sure that they somehow can stay rooted. Difficult, I think, for footballers. I was with, and actors, I was with an actor friend of mine who's worked in several of the films I've done. We've known each other for years and years, and we meet now and again. We were having a pint, and God, he was plagued by people wanting selfies. They're a curse, they really are. And luckily, I was able to train him in the, maybe because of my work with Roy, I was able to train him in the best way to say no.
What is the best way to say no?
I'm having a conversation here, do you mind?
Yeah.
And say it with a smile. And most of them say, oh yeah, sorry. And they kind of do not recognize it. Yeah, these are just two people having a pint. And there was one guy got a bit aggressive, but his pals scooted him out. Mm-hmm. But he went from being, I'm your biggest fan, to wanting to have a dig at him.
Yeah.
In the space of 5 seconds, Yeah. So, so there is that pressure, but I think there are ways of staying in touch. Like even Noel Gallagher, when he's at the football, he's in among the lads. And then, there's no way he lives at the same level of those people. But during the match, he's shouting and roaring like the rest of them. And that is a decision on his part. He could be up in the gods with the VIPs, but he knows that the experience is in. I don't know Noel Gallagher. I've never met him, and I don't particularly like Oasis, so I'm not talking him up. And I hate City. Any team with City at the end of it, actually, it doesn't matter. Bristol City, despise them. I'm not sure what division they're in, but there he plants himself in the crowd, and I was very moved. I think it was earlier this year, maybe. Alan Shearer talking about his experience of being in the crowd at a match and talking about how great it was. And it seemed bizarre that somebody like Shearer, who's very close to his roots, but because, I suppose, of his immediate recognisability, can't generally sit among the crowd. And he did, and he just, clearly it really got to him in a very, very healthy way. So I think these things are choices, really. I know it's very hard to do. But I was in Cork with Roy when the book came out, and Roy puts on a cap, and it goes, and we were walking through, and he was telling me, pointing out the place he used to go to the barbers, and he was talking about the slang that's used in Cork and nowhere else, and he was loving it. He was loving it, and clearly that's a choice he makes to stay close to where he comes from.
It strikes me often seeing fans interact with footballers that they don't think the footballer is an actual person.
Yeah.
So it's we love you or we hate you. And Wayne Rooney describes sort of going to the supermarkets and people shouting at him because he'd left Everton, as if they exist in this heroes and villains world.
Yeah, that's why I like the title of your one, Heroes and Humans, because I think I think if we call people heroes or legends or national treasures, We're taking away their humanity, really, you know. And it actually, you know, when you're at a football match, we'd all know, you know, when you're looking at it on television, it looks quite easy. But when you're actually there, the split-second timing, the lack of time they have to do something brilliant, to avoid being crippled and put a great tackle or a great pass across the pitch that creates a goal. The timing is so precise and the intelligence, whatever way it's measured, is so brilliant. And it's human because you can feel the physical effort. You can see the physical effort as well. And when they're tackled, you can hear it. You know, so it's a very, very different experience watching it live. And that's where you begin to really, really admire them.
You're incredibly unjaded about football. You still love it. And you haven't, I guess, developed a distance from whatever football has become. So
no, quite the opposite.
What's your day-to-day relationship? What do you watch games? Are you going to matches?
I do watch a lot. I'm a member of a season ticket with Bohemians.
Okay. There you go. You got a couple.
Yeah, two lads there. I slipped them a tenner each before it started. So every second Friday from between the months of February, the season runs from February to November.
Okay.
I would go to Dalymount Park. Big part of my life. Actually, in the last 6 years or so. So a very deliberate decision on the part of myself and another couple of friends. Went, absolutely loved it, and decided this is absolutely brilliant. And it is. It adds such joy. And particularly post-pandemic, to get in a crowd again, to be with the tribe. And the tribe isn't just the team you're supporting. It's also, if you like, the opposition. It's also the fans on the other side, the away fans, because you need them. We all watched football on the television when there were no people at the games, and it is so diminished, you know. And you were talking earlier about how the whole the home advantage disappeared when there were no people there. That's how significant it is. But it's a colossal part of my life. I get up early I don't choose to get up early, I just do get up early, and the first thing I do is have a look at the BBC football page. And even though I'm not particularly interested in transfers and stuff like that, January, constantly.
Well, when you're a Chelsea fan, it's a part-time job.
It's hard to keep up.
Trying to work out
it's hard to keep up which of the 37 teams we can actually put out, we're going to be putting out. But so it's a huge part of my life, and I still read a lot about football. I sometimes think of it as almost like the string on a guitar. And if you like, the bottom of the string is me as a 9-year-old, and the top of the string is me as a 66-year-old. But the sound is the exact same. Yeah. I kind of, when I'm watching Bose or when I'm watching something on the telly, I'm watching as a 66-year-old, but I still shout at the telly like a 9-year-old whose voice broke abnormally early and has a little beard and is very short-sighted. But and is bald. But yeah, so I think it's a wonderful thing. Music is a bit the same. Yeah, and reading to a degree. I always put them together. There was no, that American notion, I think, that you were either a nerd or a jock. Yeah. Didn't exist when I was a kid. There was no contradiction between reading a book and playing football. Such a stupid division, it really is. And I'm not just saying that about America because of what happened this week. It's just, it is such that simplifying life unnecessarily. So yeah, but particularly football. Oh, there's nothing like Cole Palmer's pass if he ate that goal there last week. You just look at that kid and you think, oh God, you know, it's just brilliant.
He'd play for free, I think.
He would, absolutely. You can tell. Certainly doesn't spend his money on clothes. You can see him.
You know? So what would your therapist say? It connects you with your childhood, or why do you think that you devote so many hours to this completely pointless thing?
I don't think it's pointless. And I think really, you know, what is the point of life? I mean, it's finite for a start. We're all mortal. And the older you get, the more it becomes less an abstract discussion. Because not only do the older generation die, but your friends die. And younger people die. And it's horrific, you know. So you have to fill life with as much joy as you possibly can. And to me, I work, you know, I still have the same energy. I put in the same energy, I think, into my job as a writer as I did when I was in my 20s. And I feel lucky. Well, and that is a decision on my part to keep going like that because the energy is there and I've lots I want to say. But I feel the exact same way about listening to music, about watching football. It fills life. It's a joyful thing, you know. walking the dog, I feel the exact same way. Looking down at the dog and just seeing the dog wagging its tail, happy as a, it's a bad start. I'm just saying, it's a mixed now. The dog is as happy as a pig in shit. The dog is as happy as a dog. But yeah, Larry Gogan, it's such a lovely thing. And I think in many ways the world is such an ugly place. And, and we thrive on bad news. We thrive on stories. We turn on the news and the news is not going to be good. It's never good, ever. Or if it is good, we turn it off because it's boring. And we put on Netflix, not because we want to watch a series about a nice group of people who don't murder anybody. So we play with the world's wretchedness. And I think football just allows, it's just, you watch these perfectly, in other, like 22 young men or young women who in other circumstances are just perfectly ordinary, but they just excel at some level at what they do. And they burst their guts to do it as well as they possibly can. And it's just brilliant.
Amazing. I think we've got some time for some questions. So anyone, just wave us.
So you talk about the joy in being a football fan, but some of that joy is correlated to winning. So do you think being a Man City fan is more joyful than being, say, for example, a Southampton or Ipswich fan this season?
No, I think being a City fan probably is quite tedious, really. I'd say they've probably actually had a great time the last few weeks because they're losing. And it actually sparks off a different conversation. A big part to say going to Bowes on a Friday. We've had a wretched season this year. Going to Bowes on a Friday and we draw or we lose. The autopsy afterwards in the pub. There's a certain dark joy in giving out as well. And we're very good at that in Ireland. Really giving out about stuff. And we like giving out about stuff. In the same way that we're much better at funerals than we are at weddings. I think we're probably better off. We're probably happier expressing unhappiness than we are at expressing happiness. So yeah, it's a mixed bag. We had the glory days at Chelsea as well, where we were beating everybody, and it was great. It's brilliant. But it's a bit like life. If we lived forever, a lot of what life was about would lose meaning. And I think if your team is winning all the time, you'd stop watching, really, wouldn't you? Like Manchester United went through that phase for decades where they were winning everything. And there was nothing more insufferable than a Manchester United fan. Anyway, there's nothing more pathetic than a Manchester United fan now. But back then they were kind of insufferable. Because I remember this friend of mine who was a Manchester United fan, they'd win 3-0 and he felt he'd have to give out about them because they weren't putting in enough effort. Because I think he was half dying that they'd lose so that he could really get worked up. So I don't think I'd want to be a Southampton fan just at the moment either. But a Bournemouth fan, yeah.
Brighton.
Oh, yeah, Brighton, yeah, definitely.
Forest, we're speaking about Finton's team.
Forest at the moment, yeah.
They got Forest.
So it's the ups and downs. And, obviously you want the team to be up, but it's inevitable they're going to come down at some stage, it's inevitable. So, but that's part of the package. It's life, isn't it?
We got one question up here.
Just curious for either of the three of you, since Roy's retired, there doesn't seem to be any talented kid who's watched every game he ever played and has the ambition and hunger to replicate what he's done with, dedication, work, all the things you referenced, Roddy. And I'm really curious why that hasn't happened, because I'm sure there's a lot of talented young kids, but nobody has seemed to want the space he occupied, and nobody I think in the Premiership has commanded a midfield since he's retired like he did.
Well, like once-in-a-century players are that, once-in-a-century players, there's so few of them. And I think young kids, they come up with their own heroes, I think, show videos of old players by all means, but let them find their own heroes, let their own role models, so to speak. I like another reason I like Cole Palmer is that these days he's been compared to players like Dennis Bergkamp and
he doesn't know who they are.
Zola, and he's great in that. I've heard of him.
He goes, I think he was like, I've had him on FIFA. Yeah, I think I've had him on FIFA.
But he's not running home to look at the YouTubes and to pump himself up because he's been compared to Dennis Bergkamp, because he has his own trajectory, his own history. There's a lot of young players. a lot of great players. I mean, and I think young kids find their own heroes, you know, and I don't know if it would work actually to put a bunch of young people in front of a really good compilation of Roy's best moments and what Roy did, which in a way has never been replaced at Manchester United.
The ultimate example of this is Messi, who was always supremely uninterested in anyone who'd gone before him. And when they'd play against other teams and early on he'd be asked about big opponents, he barely knew who they were and didn't care.
Do we have any more?
Heroes there as well. And obviously earlier on you were talking about people from like different backgrounds and middle class backgrounds and working class backgrounds. Do you think that that's like maybe really a core tenet of why you enjoy it? Because it's like a lot of it is both like a great leveler, but also a great unifier, regardless of backgrounds.
Yeah, I don't know how to expand on that. It's a good question, but it's kind of a question that doesn't demand an answer, I think, because you'd find yourself nodding, you know. I think my great hero when I was a kid was a player called Charlie Cook, played for Chelsea, a winger, an old-style winger. And I just decided he's the best player who ever existed, you know. And I really liked he was very deceptive, brilliant, you know. He was Scottish, which made him nearly Irish, which helped. And he was just, you know, my hero. You choose, you know, and there were probably better players and, you know, throughout, but he was my hero. I think that's what we do. We choose our heroes, and even though somebody said, but he's not as good as such and such, you know, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, it is a great unifying force. And I don't pay much attention to the biographies of players, really. But sometimes when you realise, you know, something about Didier Drogba, you realise there's more to admire than just his footballing ability. Yeah, but actually, the footballing ability is what matters, how good they are on the pitch. It is a bit inexplicable why endless thousands of people roar on 11 young men or women. And that's, I think it probably ultimately can never be explained. I think I strayed away. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question. I've been enjoying myself, so who cares?
Let's take one more question. Who is it going to be?
I'd like to ask Roddy what he thinks of Damien Duff and will he do wonders for the League of Ireland?
Duffer.
Oh, I love Damien Duff.
Duffer, like a Chelsea player, brilliant Chelsea player, should never have left Chelsea, really. Bad decision on his part, but great player, would always hold him in the highest regard. So good, really, not as a player, but now as a manager, that I've begun to dislike him intensely. Because he's managing Shelbourne. And they're up the road from Bowes. And I hate them. And I wouldn't have given them much thought, because traditionally we hate Shamrock Rovers. Absolutely fucking hate Shamrock Rovers. You know, quite rightly so. Don't give much thought to St. Pat's. They're grand. But beginning to really dislike Shelbourne. So he must be doing a great job. And in that way, it's a strange way of paying the man a compliment to say that I've begun to dislike him. But I've begun to dislike him intensely. But I still call him Duffer. What a wonderful player. And, you know, clearly he has a lot going on. There's no mistake, you know, when he's on the telly and he's working as a pundit, there's no mistake in that. The intelligence is, you could put a match to it. He's really brilliant. But for Shelbourne to go from kind of obscurity to being the champions, like a lot of it is Duffer's doing, and fair play to him. I mean, yeah, I hate him.
All the other clubs besides Irish and English clubs, like the Spanish, Italian, French?
Okay, I'll repeat that. So the question is, what do you think clubs outside of England and Ireland like Spanish and Italian clubs? So do you watch football?
If I was walking through a park and there was a match, an under-11s match, I'd stop and watch it. I just love watching the game. If there wasn't an English game or an Irish game on, I'd be watching a Spanish game. Or I like German football. I like Dortmund. I've been there. And an amazing experience, because you go in, the stadium doesn't look all that big, but when you go in, it's like a big trench, an extraordinary thing. It's like 4 cliff faces, really. And there's one terrace that's just what they call the yellow wall. It's all yellow scarves, the most extraordinary sight. And I was there when they played Liverpool. So both sets of fans were singing "You'll Never Walk Alone." And if I had hair on the back of my neck. The ghost of my hair stood on end just listening to that. What an amazing experience. So I went to a football game in Italy. I've only been to one in Italy. It was great, really, really great. The atmosphere is brilliant. And maybe strangely, I was at a game in Japan, Nagoya Grampus 8 versus Yokohama. And Gary Lineker was playing for Nagoya Grampus 8, except he wasn't playing. And he announced his retirement the following Tuesday. So I never got a chance to see him. But the atmosphere of that was really lovely and quite strange because the fans then, it's going back a good bit, it's going back maybe 30 years, but the fans were copying what they were seeing happening in Europe. The flags, the waving. I remember there was a banner, Forza, which is Italian, Forza Yokohama. And they were very polite. And at half time, they all had sushi. Now, you wouldn't get that in the League of Ireland. No, not even at Shelburne. So, but I do, football throughout the world, yeah. But I suppose there's only so many days in the week and I've other things to do. So, I mean, following two teams, one here and one across in England, is it's a full-time job as it is. Who do you follow?
Bayern Munich.
Bayern Munich.
Very exotic.
And your mother brings you to all the games, does she?
It's been fantastic to have this conversation.
Really
Thank you so
enjoyed that.
much for joining us.
It's so nice
Roddy.
not to be talking about writing. It's brilliant.
Well, no, not even one question about the writing. But we have run out of time. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
for
everyone.
attending.
Thank you, Roddy. Thank you. That was great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Very good question.
Thank you for listening to Heroes and Humans of Football. For more information, go to our website at heroesandhumans.com.
And follow us at Heroes and Humans on all social platforms. Don't forget that you can find the details for our Patreon on heroesandhumans.com. This show was developed by Immaterial and produced by One Fine Play. Matt Cheney is the series producer. Kazra Firuzia is the editor and producer. We have been your hosts, Mehreen Khan
And Simon Cooper.
and this has been Heroes and Humans of Football.